Welcome to the 2025 New York City Marathon. This is one of the most competitive and largest marathons in the entire world, as more than 50,000 runners are scheduled for today's race. And in addition to massive numbers, we also have one of the quickest elite races set to go down. As for this year's event, we have 8 athletes with personal bests under 2 hours and 6 minutes. And we also have a total of 17 runners with PBs under 2 hours and 8 minutes. Indeed, the male runners are set to make a real attempt at a super fast time, especially since Eliud Kipchoge and Kenenisa Bekele are present to run. And over on the women's side, we also have a super impressive field in attendance, as we have 8 athletes with PBs under 2 hours and 20 minutes as well. It is not an exaggeration to say that this marathon is set to be very special, and thankfully, the weather is practically perfect for a marathon, as the starting temperature was right around 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius, and the wind was practically non-existent, meaning that this year's NYC Marathon really is ideal from a conditions perspective. The possibilities for a very fast time are indeed high, so now, without any further ado, let's head to the roads and watch this year's New York City Marathon unfold. Now, to kick things off, this race starts with the iconic straight uphill mile as the athletes cross the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. And this is really one of the few times that a race starts with a straight uphill mile. And because of this, the early pace is quite slow compared to many other marathons. Now, for the elite men, they pass through the opening 5 kilometers in 15 minutes and 12 seconds, a pace of 4:53 per mile or 3 minutes and 2 seconds per kilometer. Compared to most major marathons, this is much slower than what you will typically see, but as this race continued, we saw the pace only get quicker and quicker from the world's best. Over on the women's side, the opening 5 kilometers was a very similar story, as they passed through 5K in 17:05, which represents a pace of 5:29 per mile or 3:25 per kilometer. This, again, is likely to be one of the slower splits for this marathon, as their current pace puts them right around 2 hours and 24 minutes for the finish. So as this race continues with athletes such as Hellen Obiri, Sifan Hassan, Sharon Lokedi, and Vivian Chariot, we are likely to see the pace increase as well. Back over to the men's race, and we saw a slight break up front as Yudai Fukuda from Japan gapped the field by a few seconds early on, and he held this lead for a few minutes, but he never really made a true break. Rather, he just ran up front for a few minutes. Now, through 10 kilometers, the elite men passed through this split in 30 minutes and 25 seconds, a slight increase in pace, and many of the top contenders were still in contention, including Eliud Kipchoge, Kenenisa Bekele, Albert Carrier, Benson Kipruto, and many others. And this 10K splits represents the exact same pace at 4:53 per mile or 3:02 per kilometer. And if they held this pace all the way to the finish, they would reach a result right around 2 hours and 8 minutes for the marathon. And considering that this field was still quite bunched like this, there will likely be many pushes and many breaks over the following 30 kilometers. Back over to the women's race, and they passed through 10K in 33:53, which was similar to what happened over in the men's field, as they did increase the pace slightly. And following this 10K split, they managed to hold this all the way through the halfway point, as the women passed through the half marathon in 1 hour, 11 minutes, and 1 second. And this is where something interesting happened. In the lead here, we see Hellen Obiri, Sharon Lokedi, Fiona O'Keefe, and the defending champion, Sheila Chepkarui. But about 20 or 30 meters behind the lead pack here was Sifan Hassan from the Netherlands, an athlete who owns a PB of 2 hours and 13 minutes, making her far and away the fastest athlete in this field. Through halfway, it looked as though Hassan was getting dropped. Maybe she was having an off day and just couldn't hold this pace. But over the course of the next 30 or 40 seconds, she had already rejoined the lead pack, proving her pacing abilities are genuinely incredible. This women's race was already on pace to break the course record of Margaret Okeyo, who ran a time of 2:22:30 back in 2003. But now with Hassan rejoining this front group with the defending champion, it was now possible that the course record could be crushed, and perhaps they could drop the pace to a finish down below 2 hours and 20 minutes. Back over to the men's race, and the lead pack actually seemed to grow in size as they approached the half marathon split. And even though they were initially on pace to reach the finish in around 2 hours and 8 minutes, the pace actually slowed slightly as they passed through the halfway point, and they hit the split in 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 19 seconds. This actually puts them outside of a 2:10 finish, and I will admit it was a little bit strange to see such a slowdown like this, but it did also mean that a big push could be just around the corner, and come the 25-kilometer mark, that is exactly what we saw. Just after 1 hour and 15 minutes, we saw Hillary Bohr from the US finally make a break in the men's marathon, and he gapped the field by around 10 to 15 meters as he passed through 25 kilometers in 1:17:53. According to the pacing calculators, Bohr dropped a super fast mile of around 4:25 on this break, and it certainly opened up the field as there were now a few different chase packs behind him. But as they finally reached Thunder Alley, which is also known as First Avenue, the pack had already closed in on Bohr, but behind him, there was a sizable gap back to the chase pack, which also included Eliud Kipchoge. This move really did send shockwaves through the men's field, but now rejoining the leader up front was Vincent Kipruto, Albert Carrier, Alexander Matiso, and Abel Kipchumba. And even though he came into this race with the fastest PB in the field at 2:01:09, Kipchoge was now starting to fall more and more behind as the race went on, and by 30 kilometers, he was now about 1 minute behind the lead runners. Back over to the women, as they passed the 2-hour mark, it was now a 3-woman race, as Sharon Lokedi, Helen Obiri, and Sheila Chepkurui were now the only ones left in the lead. And even though she made a few moves to get back to the lead running, Safan Hassan was just not able to stay up front, as she was now starting to fall more and more back, and she was starting to get close to running at 6-minute per mile pace. These three were moving as the finish line quickly approached, and it's also worth mentioning that all of these three runners here are the most 3 recent winners of the New York City Marathon, so they all have the experience, they all know what it feels like to win. But who will ultimately put together the best race and pull off this marathon victory? Back over to the men's race, and just before 20 miles, we saw Albert Carrier attempt to make a strong push into the lead, but the field incredibly pushed right back, even though he was running close to 4:45 per mile. These top 8 here all made it to the 20-mile split in the lead, but what would ultimately happen over the final 10 kilometers of the marathon, which is the stage where many say that the marathon officially starts? Back to the women's race, and this final stage proved to be an absolute burner, and ultimately the race came down to Helen Obiri and Sharon Lokedi. These two previous champions were now running right at 5-minute per mile pace, and both athletes still looked quite strong. But then, Helen Obiri shifted gears and dropped Lokedi like it was nothing. This move was quite convincing. Just look at the power that Obiri had over these final kilometers. Her arms were pumping, her knees were driving, and to think that she was doing all of this after already running 25 miles is pretty amazing. Down the home stretch, it was clear that Obiri officially had the course record, which again was 2:22:30 from 2003. And as the finish line approached, it was now clear that she not only had the record, but she was set to break 2:20. With a very strong final mile of approximately 4:58, Obiri crossed the finish line in first place in 2:19:51, a massive course record that also earned her an additional $50,000. Not a bad day at the office. Now finishing in second was Sharon Lokedi in 2:20:07, and finishing in third was Sheila Chepkurui in 2:20:24. All of these top 3 finishers ran under the previous course record, which again had stood for 22 years. So this was certainly an incredible race on the women's side. And speaking of incredible races, the men's race was quickly developing into a super competitive finish between Vincent Kipruto and Alexander Matiso from Kenya, who were practically sprinting over this final mile. With 800 meters left to run, Kipruto was now in the lead, holding off Matiso, but he still had not dropped his Kenyan teammate. Now with 400 meters left to run, Kipruto had officially put on a few extra meters over Matiso, and this, to me at least, made it clear that Vincent Kipruto was now set to win. But then, Alexander Matiso somehow responded back again, getting back crucial distance with each and every step. And as they reached the finish, it was literally too close to call. Both men hit the tape in 2:08:09, and they had to bring out a photo finish to see who took the win. But the victory ultimately went to Benson Kipruto, who held on for the win by about 0.15 seconds. And for their final mile here, they ran it in approximately 4 minutes and 26 seconds. An incredible close from both athletes. Now, just to finish in the top 10 on the men's side, you had to run 2 hours 10 minutes and 37 seconds or faster, which is a pace right at 4:59 per mile. And shout out to a few runners who ran a very solid race today. We saw Albert Carrier get third, we saw Patrick Dever from Great Britain run a very impressive 2:08.58 for fourth, we saw Charles Hicks breaking 2:10 for the first time, and all the way down in 17th was the GOAT himself, Kipchoge, who was only able to muster a time of 2:14.36. And unfortunately, his second half brought out many issues. And it was also unfortunate to see Kenenisa Bekele dropping out of this marathon. There's still no reports as to exactly what happened with Bekele. Maybe he had some hip issues like he's had in the past. Sometimes he's had leg issues where it just shuts down. Who knows, but I do wish him a speedy recovery. And even though this was not the fairy tale ending that we all had in mind from the two GOATs in distance running, we still have many races in the future from both runners. So hopefully, they can get back into solid fitness moving forward. This year's New York City Marathon was again incredible, as we saw a course record go down, and we saw a blistering finish on the men's side. And the athletes of the day are Benson Kipruto and Hellen Obiri. Thanks for watching, everyone. Until next time.